Our gospel reading this morning comes to us from the book of John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 44. Hear now the word of the Lord. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, though he loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after hearing that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the people there were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, but let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. Those who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her, because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and those who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There is an awful lot to unpack in our scripture readings today, but first, I wanted to tell you about the Laotian rock rat. Graphic on screen. The Laotian rock rat is a small gray mammal with particularly long whiskers. They're good at climbing. They are very cute. They live in the Southeast Asian country of Laos. Or rather, they did live in an area of the world that would much later become known as Laos, because according to fossil records, the Laotian rock rat went extinct 11 million years ago. Except that somehow they didn't, because scientists found more of them in 2005, when there is a long time gap between the last fossil record and the next living animal. The species is apparently called a Lazarus taxon. I certainly don't understand how that works. I'm not sure the scientists do either, for that matter. But to be fair, I also don't understand how the resurrection of Lazarus works exactly. But there is more than one way for dry old bones to live. Does the reappearance of the Laotian rock rat count as a resurrection? Probably not, or at least not exactly, and even though it's a Lazarus taxon, the species was not resurrected in the same way as Lazarus of Bethany, I assume. We ourselves may never witness God breathing life into literal bones or Jesus calling a beloved friend out of the grave. But there is more than one way for dry old bones to live. The Laotian rock rat is very cute, and if you're not watching online, you should look it up later. It's got giant whiskers, and I like small furry things. There is more than one way for God to breathe life into places that feel hopeless, places where defeat feels inevitable, places where life does not always feel worthwhile. Have you ever known anyone whose life was transformed when they overcame an addiction? Have you ever known anyone who left an abusive relationship but was able to start over and be happy again? Have you ever known a business or organization that was failing but made a concerted effort to regroup and rebrand and was able to grow again? There is more than one way for dry old bones to live. I think that many of us have had periods in our lives when we felt like we were existing, but not really living. Like our lives couldn't really start until we had graduated or gotten a certain promotion or gotten married or reached some other milestone that would surely be transformative. There was more than one way for dry old bones to live. The playwright Eugene O'Neill wrote a play called Lazarus Laughed in 1925, which means that it just came into the public domain 2 years ago. I spend a lot of time making sure that I'm not violating anyone's copyrighted work, so I love it when things are in the public domain. Anyway, Lazarus Laughed is a very bizarre and philosophical musing on interactions that Lazarus might have had with his family, with his community, and with authorities after he came out of the grave and after Jesus was crucified. When asked what he found beyond, that is, during the 4 days he was dead, Lazarus replies, life, eternity, stars and dust, God's eternal laughter. At one point, when his community starts to divide and people point out that just because Lazarus was resurrected doesn't mean that no one else will ever die, he has this to say, yes, 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 men die. Even a son of man must die to show men that man may live. But there is no death. Even though Christ has conquered death, we will still die. It seems like a strange distinction to make, maybe one that is really stretching its etymology, but there is more than one way for dry old bones to live. Just because people still die doesn't mean that death is anything like what we think it is. Just because people still die doesn't mean that Jesus stops loving us. Just because people still die doesn't mean that God isn't still breathing life into us in some other way. I like to think that that breath might sound a little bit like God's eternal laughter. Even if we ourselves may not entirely understand how, there is more than one way for dry old bones to live. God can breathe life into an entire valley full of bones, and Jesus can breathe stars and dust and God's eternal laughter into Lazarus. I wish that resurrection looked like Jesus calling our loved ones out of the grave. I've never seen that, and I would imagine that you haven't either. It doesn't seem fair. But there is more than one way for dry old bones to live, even if it isn't the way that seems fair, the way that we want, the way that we can see. When we hear Ezekiel's story about the valley of dry bones, do we imagine ourselves as the dry bones, breathlessly waiting for God to call us out of the valley into life? Are we feeling burned out, apathetic, resentful, nihilistic? What in our lives needs to be transformed, recreated, reborn? What is the grave that we need to be called out of? Is it full of comforting, beautiful lies? Is it full of unhealthy obsession? Is it a way to hide from the lives that Jesus wants us to lead? Is it a way to close our eyes and hold on to the good old days? If Jesus were to call us out of the grave and take off the cloth covering our faces, what would we see? There is more than one way for dry old bones to live, if only we would keep our hearts willing to hear God's call. But what does resurrection look like? Not just metaphorically, not just metaphysically, not just on the last day. What does resurrection look like right now? When we hear Ezekiel's story about the valley of dry bones, do we imagine ourselves standing next to the prophet, watching as God breathes life into those bones? Are we prophesying to the bones, letting our voices be heard, reaching out to those who feel lost or abandoned? When we hear Jesus instruct those gathered to unbind Lazarus, are we brave enough to grab on to his shroud and unbind him? Can we look past our own discomfort to support people who are not like us? Are we willing to stand behind immigrants, former gang members, recovering addicts, ex-convicts, refugees? Are we willing to push for changes in our communities that would help people who are starting out or starting over? There is more than one way for dry old bones to live. God asked Ezekiel, "Mortal, can these bones live?" The answer is yes. Yes, those dry old bones can live, and they can thrive.